Hi y'all, it's Olivia of AV Reads, and I'm here to review a brand new thriller, The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. Hard because a lot of the times the fun is what you don't know and you kind of want to go into it knowing nothing. But I think that I can review this without giving any spoilers for the story, and I really just wanted to go ahead and talk about it with y'all because I really enjoyed this book and I think a lot of y'all will as well. So let's just dive right in. The synopsis for the story, all I really knew about it going in was that it had to do with cults. And I know a lot of people really dislike cult books, so if you're in that category, do not discount this one. There is something that could be considered a cult in the story, but it has more of the vibes of like secret society than cult in a way. And I guess, you know, there's a lot of different ways like to define a cult, and in my earlier video on cults, where I reviewed the book Cultish and Sagebrush, a video game about cults, talking a lot about, you know, even things like spin fitness classes and multi-level marketing. There's a lot of things that are cult-ish, but this has more of the vibes of like, I don't know, secret society. But to start off the book, we follow Shay, who is a newly married housewife, who is a big true crime listener. And she's listening to her favorite true crime podcast one day, which is hosted by her childhood best friend, Jamie, who she's become estranged from. And all of a sudden she realizes like the newest episode is talking about her. That is talking about her experiences whenever she was in college in New York, and now she's moved back to Texas. That whenever she was in college, she had a tight-knit group of friends. One of them committed suicide while they were there, and then this true crime podcast episode is focusing about her other friend who she has not spoken to in many years since college either, has been found by apparent suicide. And she doesn't even know that her friend has died or anything, and so she's shocked and is compelled to reach out to Jamie, the podcast host, her longtime friend, and figure out what's gone wrong, because she does not believe that her friend committed suicide, and she thinks that she's been murdered, and so she's going to figure out the whole scoop. So as they go into finding out about what's happened to her friend Laurel, they go to her house, they find clues that lead them to find out about this cult, about this like secret society that somehow Laurel has gotten mixed up in, and why she might have gotten mixed up with them. Whenever we're first introduced to this group, this is kind of what I think about is more of the vibes of it, is we go to, sorry, my cat Daisy is saying hello. Come here, baby. She's so cute. The first clue that gets them anywhere is on the back of like a photograph. They find out about this like club that Laurel has recently been to. And this is kind of the tone that first really grabbed me in the story. Even though I love like a podcast inclusion in a book, which I think is really cool, and I love to read more of that. But on the back of one of these letters is the name of a club that kind of reminds me of One-Eyed Jacks from Twin Peaks. And it's more the kind of vibe of that than like a cult. Questionable there as well. But then whenever they go to it, it also has kind of like an eyes wide shut feeling. So thinking about that as like the vibes of the story. And this is very early on. I mean, this is like the selling point of the book, is that it's about cults. And so you learn very early on that this is gonna deal with topics of like sex and power, domination, and then as the book progresses, like through everything that they're finding out about Laurel and that we're learning about Shay's past, that there's a lot of gray area in this space between like pain and pleasure and domination and consent. I think it's so gray that some people might be put off that it doesn't tell you how to feel about any of it, which I really enjoyed. If you are interested in any of those topics, you're going to enjoy this book. Other tones of the book that you might enjoy, this is not like a dark academia novel, but because there's a lot of like looking at like what happened to them whenever they were in college, there is like kind of a collegiate atmosphere at times. The name of the college in this book, the name escapes me right now, but it kind of gives me the vibes of like Smith College. Like it's a very liberal arts feminist school, and so it's that kind of vibes more than. I really wanted to pick this up because I loved her earlier thriller In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which is very much like a dark academia, fully collegiate atmosphere, but this is a little bit toned back. So if you're interested in college thriller atmospheres, is this book twisty? There are definitely things intended to be twist in the book. I didn't find it super surprising what happens, but I was fully invested throughout the book and wanting to keep going. I really breezed through it, and I think it's because like it doesn't depend on the twist, because the whole content of the book is very gripping and salacious and at times sexy, at times disturbing. There was like a blurb that this was like a pitch black thriller. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. Like I kind of think this is, if you took something like Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter but made it a little bit more blockbuster-ish, does that make sense? That it has like a more conventional thriller pacing. Overall, just was really gripped by this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars, not because there was like anything that was wrong with it. It's just like, I mean, maybe I should have given it 5 stars, but I kind of wanted to do something that like, you kind of want like a little bit of a twist if from a thriller, and I could kind of tell where it was going, but I did not mind it because it was a lot about the character development of Shay and her relationship with all of these different characters in the book, and just the discussion about what consent really means. That there's clearly some relationships in this book that are abusive, and then there's some that are likely abusive, and then there's some that are, you know, that toxic things were done but maybe not abusive. There's just a lot of gray area in this book, and that's what I enjoyed about it. A quote from this book that I feel like really sums up kind of what the book was going for is, at one point Shay says, "There's no such thing as an objective observer. That's why stories are powerful. If you're listening, you're part of it." So I think that puts, you know, some sort of responsibility on the reader to kind of make of what they will of the different characters. That there's definitely things that all of the characters, not all of the characters that did that were good, but Shay is both very likable, but also it has done things or feels certain ways about things that people are not going to agree with. Absolutely, you know, people are going to dislike Shay for some of her feelings, some of her decisions, some of her beliefs, ways that we're, even if we're not an abusive person, that we can be toxic to other people, based both on our desires but our insecurities. I do think that this book could have done a little bit more to to say something about the true crime element. I'm thinking about like how Devil House by John Darnielle confronts the idea of true crime, and I think that this does too, like especially with what I was saying earlier about how there's no such thing as an objective observer, that, you know, true crime podcasts are taking on a perspective and trying to become part of it and making themselves a character in the story, and thinking about like, you know, is that a morally correct decision to do that, to get entertainment value in inserting ourselves in something that's clearly wrong and tragic. And so I felt like there could have been like a little bit more of a statement on that, or just reflection on that we spend a lot of time with this podcast host where this is just one episode in his illustrious career of true crime. It's supposed to be like a popular true crime podcast, and that we never really hear him, you know, talk about the past of the podcast. Or, you know, it's very interesting that there's now this story that's so personal to them to tell, but he's clearly made a career off of it previously. So that's something that I felt like could have been fleshed out a little bit more. But again, it's like a thriller. It can't tell every story. And I think that the story that it did tell was like very interesting. I really enjoyed it. I feel like it's hard to recommend thrillers to people because everyone has different things that they enjoy in thrillers. Like if they enjoy something that's like just like super wild and twisty, or if they want something that's more gritty and dark. So I've been thinking of 2 fictional characters that I would recommend this book to, and I'm thinking about Audrey Horne from Twin Peaks and Marianne from Normal People. Not that if you like Normal People you like this book, but I think that both of those characters would appreciate the examination of sex and power together, and the complexity of it. This book did a lot for me. I wanted to get this up quickly because for some reason I don't think that this book is technically out yet. I think it's supposed to come out tomorrow, but my library delivered it to me early on Libby, and who was I to complain? So I wanted to go ahead and talk about it now. I'm sure that there's, you know, things that I will have wished that I said, but I've given such a brief synopsis of the story. Like, I feel like it sounds like I've already talked about a lot of it, but like you get introduced to major ideas within the first quarter of the book that I did not even touch on in terms of like what their experiences were whenever they were at college. But I think, you know, I'm trying to just give context to who this book might be for, that if you're looking for something that is similar in pacing to In My Dreams I'll Hold a Knife, I think you would like this, but is not so it's a little bit more introspective because there aren't as many characters and relationships to keep up with in that way, that a lot of it is dealing more with like Shay's personal experiences and reflecting on what happened to her whenever she was at college, and then having to go through this like very you know, if you think about a secret society, that there's clearly people in power who would like that to not ever be made not secret. So she's going to have to deal with like powerful people along the way. I do think that the cult in the book was, I was surprised that I didn't dislike it, because I feel like sometimes things that talk about men versus women or gender, just like a classical sense of the gender binary and gender roles, can sometimes be reductive in a way that I don't think is actually feminist. But this, I think it worked pretty well just because it is reductive, but because it's believable within this like secret society that there is going to be a part of it that is like they don't talk about race in this book at all, but it's like clearly a white supremacist, ideal of gender roles. And so I think whenever you think of it in that sense, that of course it's going to be reductive because it's looking at this one narrow view, that it would have been a mistake for it to try to talk about other things that it wasn't prepared to. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. But the only other thing that I really wanted to discuss was, I don't think that this book cover and the title are really doing it favors to get it into the right hands. Because I think that this book cover looks very like domestic thriller and not what it was, which was more about like the cult and secret society kind of stuff. Like I think it looks like this is a story about a housewife, whereas like it makes sense in retrospect why it's named that, but she's never being a housewife in this story in the way that like this cover would have you believe. I think that a cover that would actually be more appropriate would be like the cover for the Maidens, more of like a classical, detached, weird, eyes wide shut kind of vibe. But no one consulted me whenever they were designing the book cover, and so I'm sorry that, it got to this point. But hopefully I've either convinced you to read this book if it does sound interesting to you, or, like obviously there's like plenty of content warnings, or, maybe even trigger warnings. I feel like a lot of stuff happens off the page. That's why I'm saying like it's not quite like Pretty Girls, it's not quite Pitch Black. Like a lot of the abuse does happen off the page, but it's definitely not an easy read if that's something that you are sensitive to. But I hope that if this book finds you, that you do enjoy it, because it was I think my best thriller of the year so far. And I can't wait to see what everyone else thinks about it. I do think it's going to be something that has very, very mixed reviews, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed her other work too. I know that kind of ended up having like some mixed reviews as well. So I'm interested to see if the people who didn't like that would like this. I think maybe so, because I don't think that there's like a big twist to be upset by. I don't think that the twistiness is like what would put people off. I think more it's just more the content in general. But thank you so much for joining me today. I'll talk to y'all again soon. Let me know if you're planning on reading this, or if you do read it, come back and tell me what you think. Or of course reach out to me on Instagram or whatever, but I'll talk to y'all again soon. Bye-bye.